All right. We're going to continue in this. It's not going to take as long as it did the other day. Um, what did we learn yesterday? Remember, we learned about Luther. We learned about his troubles, his faults, his misinterpretations, his misunderstandings, and what this led to, the confusion of church beliefs, and Luther's response to that scrupulosity that he dealt with, the belief that everything a person did is somehow flawed, and therefore people like bishops and priests can't be trusted, and therefore he needs to forge a new way of Christianity that's based on the Bible alone, faith alone, Christ alone, grace alone, no saints, no sacraments except two. Review from yesterday. Watch that video. Please watch it over the weekend. I'm going to give you some other things over the weekend to watch. Because I'm not in class, I really, really need you guys to watch these, take good notes, and make good outlines, study the Quizlets. We're going to have quizzes when I get back on all this. And a lot of it's going to have to be you guys being good and being disciplined and staying on the schoolwork, even though I'm not in class. So today we're going to talk about what happened after the fact of Luther doing all this. So Albrecht, remember who he is? Albrecht is Luther's bishop, the one who was in debt to Pope Leo X, the one who's in debt because he bought another diocese. He bought his office of cardinal, and he was in debt, so he started selling indulgences in Luther's diocese. Albrecht basically is telling on Luther and sends Luther's 95 Theses to Pope Leo X. Leo didn't take Luther's objections seriously. Let me tell you a little bit about Pope Leo X. Leo X was a Medici. He was a member of one of the most powerful families in Italy in the Renaissance. He was from a family that was big into banking, that was big into money, that was big into funding great projects of art. And he himself, they say in history, Pope Leo X, was more interested in actually hunting and going on trips and traveling than he was staying in Rome and being the Pope. So Leo really didn't care. To Leo, this guy Luther isn't as much of a threat as you and I can see he is, because of the hindsight is 2020, because we see in history what happened. Leo just writes him off as a nobody, as a person who's just complaining about nothing, and he doesn't take his objections seriously. Wrote him off as as a local troublemaker. However, Luther's notoriety grew in Wittenberg, and he develops quite a following. So around his own area, he gets this following because he is writing in German, the common language of the people. He is writing against the church, which is kind of in charge of a lot of things or is influential on a lot of things. And there are a number of people who aren't so much upset about the beliefs of the church as they are just upset about the fact that the church has a hand in so many things. So they're uniting with Luther for political reasons, not just for spiritual reasons. Luther was finally summoned by the Pope to discuss the points he makes in the 95 Theses. Luther dismisses this request by the Holy Father. So he basically says, you don't want to talk to me? Fine, I don't want to talk to you. Problem is, when you're the Pope, you can decide you want to talk to somebody or not, because you're the Pope. But when you're not the Pope, when you're a priest in the church, you can't turn down the Pope. Same is true for everything. If I write a letter to the president and he decides he doesn't want to write back, okay, I can't do anything about it. But if the president writes to me and wants a response, he's going to follow up on that. I'm going to be called in to respond to something like that. It has to do with the power and the authority of the people and what position of power they're in. So as a Catholic priest, this was a supreme act of disobedience, and this is definitely going to be noticed. At this point, Luther rejects all papal authority, as well as all episcopal and clerical authority. So episcopal means the bishops, and clerical just means the other priests. So he rejects. We talked about he doesn't believe that these people should have any authority. But this is a formal moment where he rejects all authority of the church, his bishops and priests and the Pope. He was given 2 months to recant. What does recant mean? What does it mean to recant? Recant means to take something back. Sometimes you'll see politicians do this or newspapers do this, where they'll say or publish something and they'll get a lot of heat about it, and they will recant. They will take it back and apologize, and hopefully that sets things straight. So he was given 2 months to recant. He did not, and then he was banished from the Holy Roman Empire by Emperor Charles V. Charles V comes up a few times. Here he is right here. Charles V is actually king of Spain as well. He's one of the greatest leaders of history, and we'll look at a map and talk about him in a little bit. Charles V is the one who banishes him from the Holy Roman Empire, which is where Luther is living. To prevent this, one of the emperor's adversaries, so to stop the banishment of Luther, to stop Charles V from banishing Luther, Frederick of Saxony, remember Saxony is where Luther lives, he kidnaps Luther, not kidnaps like against his will, but he takes him and hides him in the castle cathedral of Wartburg for 1 year. So he hides him. So Charles thinks he's gone. Frederick of Saxony secretly takes him away and hides him. And during this time, this is when Luther translates the Bible from Latin into German, excluding the books which he wanted removed. So this is major. So he has locked himself away. He's kept hidden, kept comfortable. And while he's in hiding, he translates the Bible into Latin. So we have Charles V. Like we said, Charles V was originally actually Spanish-born, one of the Habsburgs. And we see here what the Habsburgs really owned. Now, their main kingdom was the nation, the unified Spain. But they also owned the Holy Roman Empire, which is kind of breaking up these days. We kind of have it up here. As you see, I'm tracing it right now. This is the Holy Roman Empire, but you see a lot of this stuff in the middle is not really the Holy Roman Empire anymore. These are places that have kind of gained their own autonomy, their own authority, their own independence. So the Holy Roman Empire, remember, never really was an empire. It was really just the land of Central Europe that was called the Holy Roman Empire by the Pope to kind of stand up, remember, to the Byzantine Empire in the East. But all that is gone. The Holy Roman Empire is really just these territories, and Charles V owns all of them. He's in charge of all of them. So that's even southern Italy, Naples, Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain. Spain's really the big country that is tied with this whole big thing. It's kind of getting global in that sense. This is Frederick of Saxony. So now you know what he looks like. This is Leo X. If you read the caption at the bottom, just kind of gives a little bit of background on what I just said. And here's the divide that develops at this time period. And I want to go back to yesterday when we talked about the language. We talked about how in the Romance languages, in Latin, the countries that would speak languages that came from Latin would be France, Italy. You'd have Spain and Portugal and Romania even, but up here you did not have that. You had these Germanic languages, and those are the countries that side with Luther. And I really think it has to do a lot with the language that was spoken, the means of communication. But you do have this divide. The northern area of Europe seeks to separate themselves from the Roman Catholic Church, from the Roman Catholic tradition. And they do so not just because they believe what Luther believes, but really because they want independence from the church. They want independence from the Pope. If you think back to the whole Avignon papacy thing, where the king and the Pope, the king wants to control the Pope because the Pope has influence over the king and that whole thing. Well, if you separate from the church, then the Pope doesn't have any influence over you at all. And that's really what's happening up here, is these countries, these nations, these lands are separating themselves from the church, not because of beliefs. They could care less what Luther says. They're doing it so that way they don't have to follow the Pope or be concerned with the Pope or be influenced by the Pope. All right, so on the next page, Frederick of Saxony and other nobles within the Holy Roman Empire saw Luther's new ideas, like we just said, as a way of distancing themselves from the Holy See. By breaking religious ties with the Holy See, they would also break their political ties to the Holy Roman Empire. If you separate from Rome, you separate from the Holy Roman Empire. You don't have to deal with Charles V. So if you don't like Charles V as the Holy Roman Emperor, rather than trying to overthrow him, just leave the church. And then what's he going to do to you? That's the idea that these people are putting forth. In 1524, the peasants of these lands rose up against their lords to demand equality. This peasants' rebellion, we'll hear about, or we'll see in a little bit, which led to a great deal of bloodshed. These Protestant factions would rebel against their Catholic lords and princes. Charles V needed to resolve this conflict in order to unite the empire against the Muslim armies that threaten the European continent. They're always a threat. They are always on the borders, always pressing in and intimidating the European continent. Charles V needed some unity because if he had two enemies, if he had the Lutherans and the Muslims as enemies waging war on him, you can't fight two wars. You can't fight a war on two fronts. Charles V calls Luther to meet in Augsburg to discuss the new religious movement in hopes of reaching a compromise between Catholics and Lutherans. Luther and his fellow theologians drew up a summary of their theology known as the Augsburg Confession. What is the Augsburg Confession? The Augsburg Confession is the first systemized list of beliefs of Lutherans. So you had the 95 Theses that was kind of just like it was almost like a Declaration of Independence. And the Augsburg Confession is almost like a constitution. So the first document, the 95 Theses, kind of lit the spark of what he thinks is wrong. And then the Augsburg Confession is what he thinks it should be. This confession contained the same objections Luther had maintained throughout his rebellion. In response, Charles V reaffirms a sacred tradition held for centuries by the church. So Charles reads this and is like, okay, I see that you don't believe what the church has always believed. I have nothing else I can say because I have centuries of writings of saints and theologians and bishops and priests and popes and tradition and scripture that underline, underscore, and prove that the Catholic faith has been the true faith over the centuries. Luther has a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of the truth. Luthers were not pleased by this decision and protested further. Luther dies in February of 1546, but his followers carry on his theological movement. In 1555, the Peace of Augsburg was declared, which allowed princes and nobles to decide their religion that their subjects could follow. So, this was the compromise. To stop people from using religion to divide and separate from the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Emperor decided, if you want to be a different religion, you can be and still maintain your kingdom. You could still maintain your authority. And this was a compromise, but it was kind of a compromise at a loss for the church. In order to prevent his empire from dissolving, it says in this caption box, Emperor Charles V agreed to the Peace of Augsburg, which opened the door for Christian nobles to decide for themselves whether or not they would remain loyal to the Holy See. Most of Luther's followers in the upper class cared less about following the truths of their faith than they did about having as much political power as possible. Back to the beginning. There are two things happening here. You have a man named Luther who is confused about faith, confused about theology, and is struggling with scrupulosity, and he is going through a rebellion on a religious level. You have a bunch of other people who are seeing this rebellion on a religious level as a way that they can create a rebellion on a political level. So two different things are happening at the same time with the same events. You have people looking for political gains, as well as people who are confused about their faith and are following Luther kind of down the wrong way. All right, so that's everything for this chapter. For this section. So this is the whole section on Luther. Tomorrow, I will probably put together another video. Please do the homework for this. I was not happy when I saw a lot of assignments not turned in from yesterday. You have to do this work. So fill it out, take care of it, don't fall behind. There's also an ed puzzle. There is an ed puzzle for you guys about all this. I would like you to watch it and answer the questions by Monday. And I'm counting the grade this time, not just what you've watched. So do that by Monday. If you have any problems with that, you can email me. I will email you back. All right. Thank you very much. I hope to see you guys soon.